So now I'm going to show you guys how to download the practice files that we're going to be using today. Like I said, I'm going to go step by step for what you'll practice at the second half. So feel free to just step back, right? Don't worry about trying to do things as we're talking about them. Just pay attention to my screen, look at what I'm doing, and if you do that, you'll have an easier time when practicing because I'll go over all the things that we're going to talk about. So when you guys download your practice files, it's going to download as a zip, and it should either go to your download folder or wherever you tend to save things on your computer. If you are a Mac user, you should be able to simply click into that folder, but if not, and you're a PC user such as myself, you will have to unzip the file. You can do that very easily by simply right-clicking and clicking Extract All. You will have to then have a destination, right? Usually it pulls right up in your computer. So we have 2 sound files we're going to be working with today, and then I'm going to ask you for practice to record on your own as well. These 2 sound files, one is a music file that I downloaded from BinSound. The second one is a recording that I did for you guys. Like I said before, these are practice. So you will hear my voice doing a mock introduction, and I will try not to cringe too hard when I play it out loud. So the second thing is that before this tutorial, you should have downloaded Audacity. If you have not already, don't stress. Like I said, follow along and watch the screen right now, and you can download afterwards, and one of us would be happy to step aside in a breakout room if you're having problems with that. But this is what Audacity would look like for you. Audacity has a lot of settings that we won't be using today, so don't get overwhelmed. If you feel like there's too many buttons at the top of the screen, I'm going to point to each one and show you how to use them today, and we're just going to cover the basics. The first thing I want to note for you guys that you will do when we do the practice section is that I'm going to show you how to import a file. Importing is a way of bringing in files that have already been created. These would be sound files that are either MP3s or waves. What I do to import a file is I go to File, Import Audio, okay? You will want to import the 2 files that are from your folder that we just unzipped, and you can open them both up at the same time. It may take a moment since one of these sound files is quite large, but here now we have our 2 tracks we're going to be working with. So you can see that the sample audio file, this is the one that I recorded myself, is quite short in comparison to our very long music file. If you work with free music sources, you will find that most of those files are quite long. So don't stress out if you see a huge file. We're going to cut it down in a moment. But the second thing I want to point out for you guys is after you import, go ahead and save a project file. Even though our project's not made yet, a project file is going to allow us to save our work. We're gonna have a warning that's gonna pop up. Don't stress about that. All it is letting you know is that this is an Audacity project file. It's not an audio file. If you save a project file, you can open it up on your computer later and work on it more, but you wouldn't be able to play it on an outside device. So I couldn't send this to my phone and then listen to the clip, right? It's only gonna work in Audacity, which is exactly what we want for today. So I'm going to go ahead and save this file as my Audacity project. Okay, you name yours whatever you'd like. So now that we have that project file saved, while I'm going through the tutorial, I'm going to make sure to save that as I'm going along. There's nothing worse than your computer crashing midway through a project that you weren't saving. I'm sure we've all had that experience with Word documents before. Same thing with an Audacity file. Okay. So now that we have our 2 tracks imported, what I want to show you guys is how to play around with those tracks, okay? And there's a couple of things I'm going to point to, okay? And I'll show you how to use each of those things. The first is I want to show you the time shift tool. If you look at the top of the screen, you'll see that the time shift tool has 2 arrows, one on each end. It's a really great tool that's going to allow you to move the sound files around. It's incredibly useful when you're wanting to sort of test things out and see where you want to layer the different sounds. So if I want my introduction to come in a little bit into the jazz music that I have downloaded, I would shift it that way. One thing with a lot of Audacity settings is that once you click a tool, you have to click back onto your previous one to be able to work with it without using the time shift tool. So to repeat that, if I use the time shift tool to move this guy around, but then I want to go and edit, well, I have to make sure that I go back to my original selection tool. It's not that tricky once you get used to moving back and forth, but if you find at some moment that you're freaking out because you're like, I can't use that previous tool, just go back and see what you're selected on at the time. That's an easy way of sort of troubleshooting most issues, is seeing what setting you're currently on or what tool you're currently using. So the selection tool is kind of the default that I use. It's the one that's going to allow you to edit, cut, paste, things like that. So the second thing that I tend to do when I am working in Audacity is I like to play back my sounds pretty frequently. And you guys just give me a moment. I actually have to make sure that I'm able to share sounds from my computer real quick. There we go. All right, so that should be clicked now. So when you're listening to a clip for the first time, don't be shocked if it's really loud or if it's really quiet, especially if you are downloading from the internet. I find often that the music files start out incredibly loud. So I'm gonna play this real quick. If it's too loud for you, just turn down the volume on your computer and I'll show you how to adjust it in a minute. So that's our lovely jazz music. I'm just gonna play that second. The second thing we have is the audio recording I did. And just a second kind of trick to show you, if you're wanting to only listen to one track at a time, there's a mute button to the side. I can mute that jazz track so that all I hear is my own recording, okay? Hello, welcome to another episode of Just Three Things. I'm your host, Kelly Gill. Today, we will be covering the basics of Audacity. Let me introduce you to some folks. Okay, so that's my mock introduction. You guys will learn what your recording voice sounds like in just a bit. Mine tends to sound like my customer service voice. It's hard for me to like act more natural when I'm recording. But what I want you guys to practice is we're gonna learn how to put these two clips together in a more natural way. We don't want really loud jazz music with a very quiet, very, I would say, formal sounding podcast host, right? So what we will use to sort of help these two things is, first, I'm gonna cut down this jazz clip, okay? That's an incredibly long sound file. We don't wanna work with all that. Audacity is great because if you're used to working with word processors, which most people are, we're gonna mostly be using the cut and paste tools, okay? And they will work just as they do in your own word processor. So let's say I wanna cut all of this, right? We're just gonna cut it all out, okay? I can do it two ways. One is that I can use the little cut tool up here, which looks like a pair of scissors. Or if you're on a PC, you can use the control button with an X. If you're on a Mac, I believe it's command. So that is how you cut it out, right? If you wanted to paste, same thing. I can do Control C for copy and Control V for paste, and there we have it. Control Z also works for undo. Or like I said, command if you are a Mac user. So now we've got a little bit more manageable of a track size to work with. The second thing I want to point out is that you are able to zoom in using your mouse on Audacity. If you are zoomed out, right, and your sound files are like too small, like I can't see the tracks well enough to properly edit, I can zoom in as close as I want to with the detail. That's a little bit too much for me, but that right there looks manageable. And you'll know how the sounds need to be edited or how they're being changed because visually Audacity shows you with the tracks. So now we have a much more manageable size here. I'm going to show you some special effects, okay? Because that's the basics of editing in Audacity, is being able to import sound files, being able to cut, copy, and paste, and being able to use the shift tool to move those files around. I promise it is really as easy as that whenever you get started. It can be a learning curve whenever you hit problems, but for today, since we're learning the basics, it should be as easy as that, right? So, okay, now we're gonna get a little bit into special effects. This is where you can really go crazy with what you wanna do. We're gonna show you 3 things to work with today for special effects, but feel free to explore on your own during practice time the other tools that are available. So the first special effect I wanna point out is a noise reduction tool. So when I played my clip earlier, you may have noticed that there is a sound in the background. Hello. That is my very loud air conditioning unit, which I was recording near when I made this clip. Sometimes it's really hard to reduce all background noise, especially if you're recording in public spaces. The noise reduction tool doesn't always work as effectively as we may want it to. It also is not going to work as well as a completely silent room, but it can be helpful whenever you're trying your best to make a recording sound high quality. So to use any special effect, we just go to the effects tab at the top, and they are all listed out there. And when I told you there's a billion different things you can do with Audacity, I mean it. I've seen some very fun and unique ways of using these special effects. But what I'm going to show you guys is the first one, which is noise reduction. One of the things that you kind of have to have with noise reduction is a noise profile. It is a way of sort of taking the background noise and being able to signal to Audacity that that's the sound you're trying to remove. So mine is the air conditioning unit. Below, we have some tools for noise reduction and sensitivity. I will say I am not an expert in using noise reduction. I actually learned this week. So when we're troubleshooting this, we may have to like get some other people from the CDEX team to sort of work with us. But one of the things that any of these effects are going to have is a preview button that'll kind of show you how the changes are made. Hello, welcome to another episode of Just 3 Things. So what we can do is play around with these different settings, and this is on any of the effects to sort of see what works best for us. So if I change some of these settings, we can hear. Hello, welcome to another episode. I'm gonna click OK there. And we can see that there's been changes made because we can see how visually the track changed. Okay, so that's the first effect I want to show you guys. The second effect is probably the one that you would use the most. It's the one that I use the most whenever I'm working with students on podcasts, and that is the fade in, fade out tool. I find the fade in, fade out tool to be incredibly effective because it helps your sounds feel less jarring, and it really helps out with sort of easing a listener into different transitions. So if you're recording with music and audio, things like that, fade in, fade out works really well. So to use this effect, you're going to highlight the portion that you want to, and I'll show you first fade in, where you want that fade in to stop and start. So I'm going to highlight the beginning right here. I'm going to go to effect. I'm going to click fade in. And we can see now that it's a little coming in. The second thing is fade out. What I tend to do is use the time shift tool to move my second audio clip Oh, actually, this is a really good way to show you guys. Something I want to note is when you're editing, you have to have, you can't be paused. So just now I played back and then I tried to edit and it wouldn't let me. You can see the little cross out on the screen. Make sure to hit that stop button. I forget often, but it's no biggie. So if you find that it's not letting you edit anymore, go back and see if you're in the pause mode. So I click stop. We're able to move this around, right? Let's say I want to go ahead and start about 10 seconds in. I'll move it about there. I'm then going to switch back over to the selection tool. And I'm going to start where my clip is starting, and I'm going to fade out. Okay. And then I'm going to play it back because I don't know if that sounds right. Hello, welcome to another episode of Just Three Things. So I actually think for myself, I would want to move this over more. Play around with it, see what sounds best to you. So the last thing that I'm going to show you guys, it's one last effect, is how to reduce the sound. So if I want to reduce the sound of this music, maybe I feel like it's a little bit too loud compared to my audio recording, I can use the amplify function to do that. Amplify can also mean reducing. Just like when we were using the noise reduction, it has a preview panel. So I can stop it, lower it, a little quieter, right? And I can work from there. And when you saw that shorten, that means it's working. But one thing I really want to emphasize with all these effects, with all the different things we're talking about today, is you're going to have to do playback. You're going to have to feel things out, move things around. Don't stress too much about it.
Now what I want is this audio music to fade in when she starts talking and then fade out when she starts talking and then fade in once she's done. So one way that we could do that would be to select this part of the track and then go to Effects at the top and go to Auto Duck, okay? So we should see this Auto Duck feature, and this middle part is how much it's going to duck, and by duck I mean it's going to decrease the sound of the music. And so let's say we want to decrease it 15 decibels, and then on the right we have how long it's going to take for that fade to happen. So if we want it to be a really quick fade, we would have it here. If we want it to kind of gradually fade, we can increase this. And then we hit OK, or you could preview it if you wanted. But then you'll see that as it gets close to Kelly's speaking, the audio fades and the music is much lighter. And then once she's done talking, the music increases. Okay.
So now that we kind of have these different things, we've shown you how to sort of edit and manipulate tracks that are already there. I want to show you how to add your own track and add your own recording. So to add a track, I would go to Tracks, Add New. I'm going to add a stereo track. You can record from any position, so I can click where I want to record from, but you can also record from the beginning and use the time shift tool to move it around. So one thing that I've sort of done, you guys are free to do it this way, is for the Little Mock podcast, Audacity. Let me introduce you to some folks. I said I could introduce you to some people, meaning you guys are free to introduce yourself on your own track, okay? You can use your fake NPR name, you can use your real name, but I do want to emphasize when you're practicing on your own, no one else can hear you recording so long as you have your mic muted for Zoom. So don't stress about what you sound like, okay? Just play around with it. So to record, it's pretty easy. You click the record button and you can see that it is taking in the text. I have double checked that I have the correct input and output for my own computer. if you try to record and no sound comes from it, you don't see any sort of recording coming in, double check that you have the proper mic listed. Sometimes computers will default to a different setting, and if you have a headphone clicked in, right, it might not pick that up immediately. So play around, see that you have the correct input and the correct output, and then you can practice playing it back. And you can see, oh, that's even worse than the other one I recorded. So once you record, you can do just the same as the other ones we manipulated, right? So you can delete out any blank sound if you want. You can use the time shift tool to move it about. You can use the amplify tool to make it louder or quieter. But really, the recording you make is no different than the recordings you imported, other than the fact that they're probably not polished and they might not be edited yet. But those are all of the basics you need to be able to record, to edit, and to use special effects. And it's just barely touching on what Audacity is capable of, but these are the tools that I use the most. The last thing that I'm going to show you guys before we sort of like go and explore on our own is how to export. So like I said in the beginning, a project file for Audacity is different than the file you would use to share with other people, or maybe a file you would put on a video or share on a website. And so to do that, we have to export. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that my project file is saved. And then I'm going to go ahead and export. You have lots of options for exporting, but we recommend usually that people either use a WAV or an MP3 file. These are the most common sound files that other programs are going to accept for editing or be able to share with. The big distinction between an MP3 and a WAV is that WAV files are generally much larger files because they retain more of the richness of the sound and they are not compressed. So if you are concerned about space on your computer, disk space, or if you are sharing it like via email, you might want to export as an MP3, but otherwise you can pick whichever one you prefer. And for today, I'm going to go ahead and export as a WAV. So I'm going to choose somewhere on my computer. I'm going to give it a name and I'm going to save there. It's going to give me another warning. Audacity is really great about that. Letting me know that all these tracks are going to be mixed down and exported as a single stereo file. And I'll show you guys exactly what that means. What that means is that if I were to open that up or import it even, what it's going to do is that now it's all one track. So we had 3 tracks before that were all able to be edited on their own, but when it exports, it puts it as one single sound file, which means that we lose the ability to edit all 3 of those tracks separately. And that's why it's really important that you save as both a Audacity project file and then you export separately as an MP3 file. I cannot stress enough that if you export only and forget to save, that you will no longer have the ability to access those different tracks and edit them without doing some work on your own, right? Without re-recording or going in and cutting all those files or things like that. So that's why we keep 2 separate files, and that's the distinction between the project file and the Audacity and the sound file. There we go. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. And we're going to help you guys work on practicing on your own.
Now what I want is this audio music to fade in when she starts talking and then fade out when she starts talking and then fade in once she's done. So one way that we could do that would be to select this part of the track and then go to Effects at the top and go to Auto Duck, okay? So we should see this auto duck feature, and this middle part is how much it's going to duck, and by duck I mean it's going to decrease the sound of the music. And so let's say we want to decrease it 15 decibels. And then on the right, we have how long it's going to take for that fade to happen. So if we want it to be a really quick fade, we would have it here. If we want it to kind of gradually fade, we can increase this. And then we hit OK, or you could preview it if you wanted. But then you'll see that as it gets close to Kelly's speaking, the audio fades and the music is much lighter. And then once she's done talking, the music increases. Okay.